here, and I just want to take a quick look of if there's anybody here, it's the first time they've been into our theater. Can you raise your hand? Yay. All the people that are applauding are all the locals who are so great. Are all of you from off island? Who's from off island that came across? Yeah. Well, thank you. On behalf of Vashon and VCA, I definitely welcome you. I know one person came from Portland. That's the farthest I heard that someone came. So welcome to everyone. So one of the great things about being a gallery director is being able to really get to know some of these artists, and I've gotten to know Jim through this curation of this show and also this talk. And he has been very transparent about his creative imagination and hallucinations and how that's inspired or has been his work. And I find that unique and endearing and inspiring that someone had these, since a child, I can't use my hand, since a child has had this, things going on in his head. And what he's done is put them on paper, created a comic of Frank, a graphic novels, and had other people enjoy them and make a living out of it. And I find that really intriguing and inspiring. So Jim has been on the island for 7 years. He came in 2015 with his wife Mary, and they lived 25 years in the U District. So Vashon, once again, has been graced with a wonderful gem of a talent and artist. He's going to talk today about his book, One Beautiful Spring Day, and his creative process. It's a 400-page epic book, bringing 3 books together and adding another 100 pages. I do want to tell you that after this, he will be out signing more books. I understand we did sell out of the books. I was trying to get more, but they're in quite demand. I will get some more next week. Jim would be happy to sign them. So if you want a book and want it signed, I can definitely get it to you. We also stick around. We have a table set out. He brought his other big pen that he did the big drawings out there. He's going to demonstrate it. If you all know, he discovered that big pen. he created that big pen because he wanted to do big drawings. And actually, we are going to have you participate if you want to use the big pen. He says that's, I'm seeing somebody very excited right now about the possibilities. Like, yay. So stick around for that. So without any further ado, I want to introduce Jim Woodring.
Hi there. Thank you for coming out here. First of all, I want to thank Lynn for setting this up and also for proposing and curating the show in the gallery. Thank you, Lynn. And while I'm at it, I want to thank my wife, Mary, for her many years of loving support. I used to be friends with the great American cartoonist Gil Kane. He was a generation older than me, and he sort of took me under his cultural wing and taught me many life lessons. Excuse me. The smoke is giving me a frog in the throat. Anyway, he told me this story. There was an artist, a musician, who from an early age was driven to be the very best musician. They were obsessed with it. And they were good, they were talented, and they were smart and terribly ambitious. And one day when they were about 19, they were standing out under the stars and they said, "Universe, or God if there is one, I want to be an epoch-making musician so badly I can taste it. Please give me a sign." And he heard a voice, a loud, clear voice in his head that said, "You will be a great musician." And 60 years later, that person was sitting in his house with his head in his hands, saying, you know, I wanted so hard to do this, and I achieved it, and it's great to be a world-famous musician, but when I think of what I did to achieve it, I'm a little bit ashamed. It wasn't a very nice life. I was mean to people. I neglected my family. There were so many things I could have done and should have done. I feel that my monomania was a bad thing all in all. And when I think about all the lost opportunities and the clumsy bad things I did, I just feel that it's so, so sad. And at that moment, in the depths of his despair, he heard that same voice that he had heard 60 years ago. And it said, "That is sad." And I feel compelled to narrate this little string of ascending and simultaneously descending anecdotes. Francis Ford Coppola, who's known for his wildly extravagant and messy filmmaking processes, I read something attributed to him. I'm just paraphrasing, where he said, you know, Woody Allen, whatever you think of him as a person, as a filmmaker, as an artist, does something very admirable. He writes his own films, he directs them, he gets the music he wants, he gets them cut the way he wants. They're very pure artistic statements, done very simply and very inexpensively. And I really think that's great. And then right after that, I read a quote attributed to Woody Allen, where he said, and again, whatever you think of him, he said, you know, I know spiritual people, and I think they've got something really great. I'm not spiritual myself, he said. And I sometimes wish I were. I think it would be wonderful to have a spiritual life. And then after that, I read a quote from a great renunciate, a great holy man, who said, I have done what a person should do in this life. Well, I'm here to talk about this book. The title, as you can see, is One Beautiful Spring Day. And I've given a lot of talks about my various books over the past 20 years or so, but I've never had as hard a time talking about one as I have talking about this. One reason is that it's 400 pages long. It's very complicated. Even though the story is linear, it's linear like this. And it doesn't have any language in it. There are no names, no captions, no dialogue. Well, there is one sentence tucked away in it. It's hidden. So it's a little bit of a treasure hunt, but I don't think anybody's found it yet. For all intents and purposes, there's no words, so nothing gets described, nothing gets discussed, and lots of unprecedented, inexplicable things happen in this story. And without the language, it becomes even harder to tell what's going on. There are conversations between people that run several pages. You see them talking, but you don't know what they're saying, and yet you do. But the real reason this book is hard for me to talk about is that I'm not the author of most of it. And in order to explain that, I have to treat us all to a trip to my childhood. Something to set the mood. When I was a very little boy, I had all kinds of perceptual problems. I had psychological problems, I had emotional problems, and I saw things that weren't there, and I didn't rightly see things that were there. And it was so overwhelming and compelling that I really didn't know anything was wrong with me. I thought this was just the way life was. I hallucinated, I experienced real paranoia, I saw apparitions, and I missaw things. And it was alternately scary and blissful for me, but it made life sheer hell for anybody who had to deal with me, because I just didn't respond to things in a normal way. And as time went on, and I sort of got away from this stuff, and began to understand the real world better, I found that I really missed that potent, highly charged way of living, that blend of mystery and fear and confusion and terror and ecstasy. Real life just didn't have that much of that stuff as far as I could see, and I was always looking for it. And later on, when I discovered that there was such a thing as imaginative drawing, and that people were making pictures of things that reminded me of the things that I had seen and wanted to see more of, I determined that I would be an artist. And that was an uphill slog because I wasn't a natural draftsman by any means. My 9th grade art teacher sent me home with a note to my parents that said, "Drawing and painting is not Jim's forte." And he was right. I wasn't a good artist at all. It wasn't until I was in my late 20s that I was able to draw anything like as well as I wanted to. And when I could, this is the kind of thing I started drawing. Reconstructed views of the way the world looked to me when I was a little kid. It didn't look like this all the time to me, but there were definitely episodes where the world seemed this alien and this scary and this bizarre and this, to me, interesting and appealing and attractive. I really enjoyed feeling all those things, and I wanted to conjure them up in my own work. This is a drawing that I did which captures in one picture a bunch of very specific situations from that I remember from those very, very early years, and to give you an indication of the kind of problem child that I was. If you look on the left-hand side of that, you'll see what looks like a box, a wooden crate with a label on it and something inside. Well, when I was a child, I was sitting in my room and a workman came in with a large wooden crate like that, and he opened it with a crowbar, and my mother was in it, standing up with her eyes shut and a big grin on her face and covered in measles or little red spots. And I hid under the covers because I was so scared, and when I came out, she was gone, and so I went to the kitchen, and my mother was there, and I asked her what had happened to the box and the red spots and everything, and by the time she understood what I was saying, we had another one of those awful scenes that characterized my childhood. But at any rate, the reverberations from all that stayed with me, and I started making art that either captured those things from my past or constructed new things based on those vibes. So all the work that I do like this comes from that initial impulse. And I imagine it's like the kind of imaginative drawing that anybody does, where you work out and you get an idea and you work it out and you do sketches, and it's a struggle to put the image together and finally render it. And all of my regular work, all of my non-frank work is produced this way. It's based on impulses that I have and ideas that I have, and I can tell you exactly where it comes from. And I made a career out of doing these kinds of drawings. When I was, around 1980, I produced the first issue of this magazine called Jim, which was just a showcase for my bizarreness. And it got me some attention. It brought me to the attention of Fantagraphics Books, the great publisher of great cartoonists. I'll just let that one go. And they put it out as a regular magazine, and then later on it became a comic, and then it became a book, a collection. So if you're interested in this stuff, somewhere out there there's a big fat 200-page book filled with souvenirs of my youthful insanity. So around 1987 or 88, I was married, I had a child, I was working, and I was building a body of work based on these ancient memories, and something arose in my mind, something which would not be denied, and that was the idea of a cartoon character, a generic cartoon anthropomorph who wasn't a cat or a pig or a dog or anything but a pure cartoon character. And this is what emerged. This is the very first drawing of Frank. Frank got his name because a friend's mother saw a drawing very similar to this one and said, "Oh, you have to name him Frank. He looks like my cat, Frank." Why people think Frank is a cat, I don't know. But I said, okay, his name is Frank. And then a couple years after that, a fellow named Mark Landman, who was editing a anthology magazine of alternative comics, contacted me and asked me if I would do a strip for this new book. And I said, sure, what do you want? And he said, do a comic that looks normal but isn't. And I sat down to think about it, and this character and another character who had been in my sketchbooks called Manhog, this half man, half pig guy, just popped into my head. And this is the very first page of the very first Frank comic. And it changed a little bit over time, but all of the basic elements were there. The landscape, Frank's lazy insouciance, the sense that he's being taken care of by this environment that he's in. It changed stylistically over the years, but all of the elements were there. And I found that these stories were very, very easy to produce because I would sit down with the intention of getting an idea, and a thought would present itself, like Frank wakes up in the morning, and I would examine it, and if I didn't feel a certain frisson, if I didn't pick up on a certain fluorescence from that idea, I would just discard it. So Frank wakes up, no. Frank is walking, oh, that's got that feeling. Okay, Frank is walking, I write it down. He is walking along the edge of a cliff. Okay, that's got the feeling, I write that down. He looks down and he sees an object at the bottom of the cliff. Yeah, that object is attractive. Yeah. And you pull back and you see that there's no way for him to get down there. That's good. So I would just put the story together from all these received ideas, and at the end I had a story, and I would draw it up. And the drawing up of it was always very smooth and easy. But I had no sense of composing these stories. They just happened. Right after this first 4-pager, I did a 24-page color story called Frank and the River, which was written in the same way. The whole story just came to me as if dictated. And this story gave me an entree into the world of alternative cartooning, which there was at the time. And I became one of those guys. And for the next 15 years or so, I kept drawing Frank comics. The style evolved and became codified until all of the pen and ink drawings looked pretty much like this. And I was very happy doing this. I had noticed that there was a structure to the stories, that each one started with Frank in a kind of state of equipoise, and then his curiosity would get him to do something which would cause often something pretty terrible to happen. Something else would happen, and the story would end with the whole situation restored to the beginning. And I didn't plan these out consciously, as I say, they just came. And I was happy to draw them up as they occurred. Around 2010, I started drawing 100-page comics. I did one called Weathercraft. And then the next one I started to work on was originally called Poochie Town, which that name got revived later on. But I had my story in hand and I started drawing it, and I drew these first 6 pages. And this was the storyline as it had come to me in the script I was working from. And you can see that there's this character in a balloon, and this figure with the horns here, Wim, is indicating that he wants to ride in the balloon, but he's given the old raspberry, so he throws a chunk of stone at the balloon and pops it. And to slow the balloon's ascent, the occupant of the balloon jettisons all this stuff. One of them is a croquet set, and the croquet set sets off the rest of the story. But I didn't like that story. I decided to change it, which I had never done before, really. And so I had Frank leave the Unifactor, and I thought it would be a great idea if he met a significant other, somebody he could have a relationship with. I thought that would be great. So I did this whole big long story, which involved, as I say, Frank leaving the Unifactor and going to another place. The Unifactor is the place where the Frank stories are set. And it's also the voice that speaks in my ear. There's too many details to keep straight here. Anyhow, he ended up washed up on the shore of this other place. And he had all of these mysterious things happen to him there. And at the end of this road of trials, he met his counterpart, who became named Fran, and he brought her home with him. I assume they're male and female. I'm just guessing. I'm an outsider. Anyhow, after I had that book in hand, I realized that I had done a real injury to the franchise because the stories were always driven by the fact that Frank would wake up in the morning alone and, seized by curiosity, go out and explore the world around him. And that was what made all the adventures happen. But now that he had this live-in companion, he didn't have that drive anymore. He slept in, he read the newspapers, he did the crossword puzzle, he gardened, he did all these other things instead of going out and having adventures. And I thought, oh gosh, what have I done? And the Unifactor, which had abandoned me when I started changing the story, came back and said, well, here's what we're going to do. We're going to take Fran out of the equation in this very ingenious way, and everything will be good. And that's what happens in the book called Fran. That mistake that I made was undone. But the two stories, Fran and Congress of the Animals, were constructed so that there was no saying which one was first. They kind of made a loop. And that bugged me because it destroyed the whole sense of structure that I had had in all the other stories. So, when I sat down to do the third book, as a penance, I had to redraw those first 6 pages over again. These look like the same drawing, but they're not. I copied these 6 pages line for line to indicate that it looked like what had happened before, but it was actually a totally different reality. And the way you can tell is on the last page, you see she comes across the croquet set like she does in the other version, but she leaves it alone and instead focuses her attention on this instrument in a case. And that story continues from there. So I'd paid my dues, I'd provided an off-ramp for the loop, and I did the story as dictated to me, and that story was Poochie Town, or the title came back. The titles are as arbitrary as everything else in these stories, as far as I'm concerned. They're suggested and I put them down. What the dickens is that doing there? Anyway, one of the problems that I had, let me go back one. One of the problems that I had with Poochie Town was that there were all kinds of anomalies in it. Things happened that I didn't like, it didn't wind up right. But I decided I was going to handle the script as given to me. And so I didn't change anything and I drew it. And I had these 3 books which kind of formed this inconclusive knot of stories. And then the idea for what became One Beautiful Spring Day just descended upon me. And it was astonishing to me. I wrote it up and I drew it and I put the whole book together, and the result, this 400-page book, just spoke to me personally as if it were a very specific commentary on my own life and my own situation and what to do about it. I derived a lot of self-knowledge from working on this book, but even more from reading it afterwards. I learned, for example, that you can change the past. I had made that mistake with Congress of the Animals. But by coming up with this framing situation, which put those 3 books into an entirely different light, that mistake became an artistic masterstroke, an act of genius. It was brilliant. It became it was just a big thing. So that's as much of a concise history as I can give of the book. I'm going to show you a few things that are in the book. There's a sequence near the beginning where Frank has seen such ugliness in the world and been driven to such despair that he's sitting here holding this knife, and he's thinking of cutting his throat because he's so miserable. But what happens is the house shakes and this enormous figure comes charging over the hills, except in a strange feat of reverse perspective, it gets smaller as it gets closer to Frank until it's just the right size when he gets near, and this figure turns out to be a magician. And he performs some really nice magic tricks. This figure is also on the cover of the book. Excuse me, sir, is this your missing gonad? That drawing was done for this book here, just to develop that character. And so here he's got this little purse and he drops it. Frank can't pick it up because it's too heavy, but the magician can not only pick it up, he can pull all kinds of things out of it, like a magician will. And when he shows Frank the purse, there's his missing gonad, even after all that other stuff came out. So the answer to that question is yes. Anyhow, Frank is thrilled. And the magician does a few other tricks, including throwing a string up into the sky, and then a wheel rolls down it, and he puts the wheel on Frank's head, and it absorbs his head and changes into something before turning back into his regular face. So this is a really good magician. And then he produces a stick of lit dynamite. And he puts it in his mouth, and he grabs Frank and the pups, and he hugs them to him just as the dynamite is about to explode, which it does. This is another sequence in the book. This is an important one. It's from the book Fran. Frank has discovered an underground cavern in which this little homunculus has been stashing stuff that he's stolen. So he brings it all up to his house, and they're going through it all and looking at all this wonderful stuff. And he finds this device, reads the instructions, hangs up a sheet, and the way this thing works is you put it on your head and press the button, and it starts playing your memories backwards, starting with your most recent one. So he puts it on, and we see things that have already happened to him happen again, but in reverse. And then it goes back farther than we've seen, into episodes that have occurred, but which we now only have these glimpses of. He takes the same machine, and he puts it on the head of this bilobed creature called Pushpaw. And we see what Pushpaw's recent hours have been like. But then he tries to put it on Fran's head, and she doesn't want it put on his head. Her head, I mean. So he insists in kind of a playful way, and she grabs it and smashes it. She really won't let him know what she was doing before he met her. And that's significant. And this is a sequence from Poochie Town. And I didn't, I'll get to it. There are things about this I didn't like and didn't understand, but I was determined to act as I was instructed to anyway. He finds this accelerator pedal and a steering wheel just out in the landscape. And when he steps on the accelerator, he and Manhog don't move, but the landscape moves behind them. They're standing still and the landscape is rushing by. And once they get the hang of it, they're enjoying it. Frank is careening through this landscape, steering with the wheel so that things that are rushing towards him don't hit him. Manhog gets knocked away by a tree, but he comes back, and he insists on taking the wheel. which he does, and now he's driving, I guess you would call it, recklessly. And he gets distracted and he isn't paying attention, and they both react in horror and then the script said, we see options. And this is the first time anything like this had happened. We see all the ways this could end up. A mountain could rush up and smack them. They could hit something and fly over it. They could hit a building and go in the window. The street could suddenly curve down and they could smash into the earth. Or they could have a collision with somebody else who also has a steering wheel. Or they could just come to a cliff and see that the steering wheel and the gas pedal extend into the bowels of the earth. But what happens is they end up in this brightly lit bedroom in the bed with all of these creatures in this house, and the story goes off in a different direction from there. And that's my presentation. Or I should say that's the end of my slideshow. I can talk more if you want, or I can answer questions if there are any. If anybody has any questions, I would be happy to answer them for you. If not, I'll just vamp up here until my time is up. Any questions? There's one. I can barely see the audience, so I can't.
Are you able to activate the unifactor, or it just comes to you at its own speed?
It comes to me at its own speed. It's an independent entity. I can't control it. I don't understand it. It's obviously part of me. It's in here somewhere, but there's like a wall between that and my consciousness. So Jim Woodring, didn't write these Frank stories. Some aspect of me that is not Jim Woodring wrote these stories. And there have been many times when I got a whole story completed without knowing anything about what it was about, and then afterwards I've discovered some very obvious pun or point or very specific thing that this thing was trying to tell me, something that I needed to hear. And so the unifactor sounds kind of schizophrenic, but I don't think it's that, because it really does seem like a separate entity and not something I identify with. It's just there. But it's the point I was trying to make earlier, and I may have done it, I don't think I said it very clearly, is that all of my other artwork is based on these childhood traumas, and it's kind of limited for that reason, you know? It doesn't broadcast in a very wide frequency, and a lot of people don't pick up on it. But Frank, everybody seems to be able to relate to Frank. My wife and I have traveled all over the world on the dimes of people who have wanted to get us over there so they could find out more about Frank. He's been a good friend to me and to us. So yeah, no, the unifactor is something outside myself as far as I can tell.
I have a mic here you go.
A microphone.
Hey Jim, thank you so much for sharing what you have with us. I'm curious if the childhood traumas came to some sort of sudden end and you lost access to the hallucinations, the material they provided, or if the unifactor unveils scenes that in fact are products of the earlier hallucinations and trauma.
Well, all those weird childhood scenes ended gradually as I began to see more and more of the real world and see more and more how to navigate it. I still hallucinate occasionally. Usually it takes the form of me just looking at a person and seeing them in a way that they are not. One memorable event happened about 10 years ago. I was in a store and a neighbor lady saw me and came up to me and said, "Jim," and I turned around, and instead of her head, it looked like someone had taken a balloon and glued dryer lint all over it, and then popped the balloon and then pushed in the front of it and put a big wad of chewing gum at the bottom. I mean, I just saw this as clear as day. And I screamed in terror, and she said, "Oh, I'm sorry, I didn't mean to startle you." And as a matter of fact, the most recent one was at Thriftway about a month ago. I saw a person that had had something going on with their head that wasn't really going on there, but it was jaw-dropping. The unifactor is very specific to these stories, and I don't know where they come from. I don't relate to them. They don't have any links to my past that I'm aware of, if that answers your question.
Yeah, it does. Thanks so much.
Thank you. There's one.
Oh, that's somebody with their hands. Uncle Jim. Oh, sorry.
Okay.
What's next for you? I know that the unifactor may not be the thing because I've studied your work and you've dived into other properties very, very successfully. Aliens, you did one of the best graphic novels ever. You wrote it, which was weird. Also, Jabba the Hutt, The Deal, which I thought was also really wonderful. I mean, you could do anything, so I'm always wondering, what are you going to do?
You know, I don't know myself what I'm going to do. I'm kind of at a crossroads. There's something so final about One Beautiful Spring Day, and I don't have any stirrings in that direction at all anymore. My desire to draw a Frank comic is nil at this point. I think there may be one more to liberate Manhog, a short story just to give him a break after all he's been through. I've read the book Weathercraft. He suffers the torments of the damned for about 30 pages there. And for that alone, I think I owe him a break. But I don't know, this really could be the end of the line for Frank. I just don't know. I'm sort of, the question, what's next? I don't know. I'm waiting to find out.
I was just curious, when you were growing up and having these hallucinations as a child, did you share them with anybody? And what were the friends and family's reactions to them?
Yeah, well, I did share them, but I didn't say, hey, Mom, I had a hallucination. I said, Mom, what's that horrible thing in the punch bowl? Or, hey, Mom, how'd you get out of that box you were in? And what happened to the red spots? And aren't you dead? Or, and worse things. So my folks had a very hard time coping with all that. It really, really, really disturbed my mother terribly. And I didn't get along that well with my teachers or my friends' parents. I just was on a different wavelength. I got used to being a pariah at an early age, which has stood me in good stead over the years. I like it. Yes?
Would you say that your art is spiritual? You sort of hinted at that at the beginning.
Well, there are, in One Beautiful Spring Day, there are story elements and episodes that correspond closely to spiritual fables that are well known in the world. The overall, there's a very famous Vedic tale of Krishna and Arjuna, and Arjuna says, what is Maya? Krishna says, oh, I'll tell you, but go get me a glass of water. So he goes to the well, and he meets a woman and falls in love, and they have kids, and they grow old, and then a flood washes them away, and he's lying on the ground, and Krishna walks up and says, where's my glass of water? And that's Maya. And that figures in this as well. There's something very much like that. And while I was doing it, I was thinking, oh, that's like that other thing. And there are, like I said, there's a sentence hidden in there that's a spiritual message, but I don't think the work itself is spiritual. I've never had a spiritual experience from a work of art. But those thoughts are there. The idea that stuff is real is in there, definitely.
Hello, Jim. I think it's fascinating that you naturally hallucinated pretty regularly, it seems. I wanted to know, have you ever intentionally tried to hallucinate, and how did that go, if you did?
Well, I've heard that people hallucinate when they take hallucinogens. That never happened to me. I didn't see things, I just had all those feelings that you get and saw the world in that way, but I didn't really see things that weren't there exactly. So no, the things that I experienced are just neurological misfires of one sort or another, bad wiring in my brain, and arbitrary, confusing things. But no, I've never done it with aid. Yes?
Do you have any anecdotes of publishers you've worked with?
Oh, boy.
What was the question?
Anecdotes about publishers? You know, that's the kind of gossip that could really hurt me. So I will say that I don't have any bad anecdotes about my current publisher.
How about a good story?
A good story? Well, I would have to think about that. There have been so many wonderful things that have happened in this wild, crazy ball of wax we call the alternative comics game. I would need to think about that a little bit, separate some. I mean, we used to go shooting with Gary Groth out in the woods, and people would get really high and misuse firearms. That was exciting. Not Gary, he never did that. Yes?
How do you develop each finished page? Your process, do you start with a sketch? What
Yeah.
tools do you use?
Well, I start with a written script, and then I make thumbnails. I break them down into pages so I get the page breaks right. If I want a scene to take a while to read, I develop all that stuff there. Telling a story without words is difficult because if you want to show that 3 hours have elapsed, you can't have a little sign that says 3 hours later. I have to draw a scene and then draw the same scene but with the shadows changed. So you can tell it's about 3 hours later. It's very labor intensive. But I work all that out in sketch form, and then I draw it on paper, and then I transfer it to Bristol board and draw it tightly, and then I ink it with a pen and ink. Does that make sense?
Yes, thank you.
Yes.
So what made you choose to tell your stories without words, especially since you start with the words? I'm curious about what made you choose to accept that challenge.
It was just in the template. It was just the way the thing came to me, and it made sense that there should be no words in it. And at one point I toyed with the idea of putting language into it, but it just didn't work at all, you know, having Frank say, "Ye gods," or something when something went haywire, it just didn't make any, it didn't add anything to it. And I like the idea that you were looking at something where there are things in here that, since you don't know their name, just their form, you don't know anything about them really. And if you tried to describe them, say, oh, well, there's a bunch of animals pulling on ropes that go down a hole, and then the thing comes up, and I can't tell if it's shooting up or if they pulled it up, but they're all falling back, and there's this radially symmetrical thing with eyes, and the ropes have hooks, and they're stuck in his flesh. It doesn't tell you much to describe what's going on. You have to kind of look at it and intuit it. And like I said, there are scenes where people have there's people sitting and talking to each other for a couple of pages. You see them gesturing and listening and everything, and you can kind of tell what they're saying just from the acting in it, and because there are ideas behind these stories that, like I say, I didn't put there, but they are there. And that comes through somehow. I've had people tell me, oh yeah, that, you know, the conversation that Frank and Fran are having, you know, you can tell what they're saying to each other, and I felt that too. But it wasn't by design, it just came out that way. It is fascinating. I feel lucky to be able to do this.
Hey, Jim.
You.
I think online I saw some Japanese computer animation of your
Oh,
stuff.
yeah.
Has anything else been animated?
Every so often somebody will send me some Frank animation that they've done, but there haven't been any major animation projects like the Japanese animation you're talking about. Those are on a DVD called Visions of Frank, which is out of print and hard to find. But I think that's 10 different Frank stories animated by 10 different young Japanese animators in different styles. And what I love about this collection is in every case they changed the story. Like they thought I hadn't quite got it right, so they fixed it, made it their own. And I love that. I think that's great. Because I can't lay any more claim to Frank than they can. You know, when I draw him, I'm not sure I've got him right. think, oh, this looks good, but is that him? Is that how he looks? I don't have a model to work from. It's all very spooky.
Hey, Jim.
You.
Talk about going large. You wanted to go big for some urge, and where did it take you? What did you learn?
Oh, you mean like those large pen drawings out there?
Yes.
It was, you know, you ever see one of those giant pencils when you were a kid, like they would have in stationery store displays? I always wanted one of those, and I never had one. And then I thought, well, maybe I could make a giant pen. Maybe that would be fun. It would be interesting. And I thought about it, and I just thought, I'll make this giant pen. It'll be a beautiful object, and if it works, I can draw something with it. And it did work. And so I spent a couple of years trying to figure out what to draw with it. And I drew, I made a drawing of a shrunken head. It's like 5 by 6 feet. But it's just a big shrunken head. I did a frog. It's just a big frog. It doesn't take advantage of the technology. It just looks like a blow-up of a small drawing. But with those big pen drawings, I thought, this is as close as I'm ever going to get to being an abstract expressionist. Working big and intuitively and just going for the emotion and the composition and the hidden effects and all that sort of thing. So that was the impetus was to find a use for the pen that justified its existence. And that's how those drawings came to be.
Your Amazon documentary, do you think that's a useful tool to understand your process, or you're kind of distancing yourself from that, or?
Amazon documentary?
Yeah, the one that's on Amazon, on demand. Your documentary.
Oh, that one. I haven't watched it.
You should.
I should?
Yes.
I don't think so. You know, because when the guy said he wanted to do this documentary, I said, okay, but only me talking and my artwork. I don't want any reconstructed scenes where I'm shown walking around a corner and going in somewhere, and I don't want other people interviewed or any, just me and my work. So it's me droning on, and it has to be a certain length if they're going to get a certain kind of consideration for it as a film. So in this case, they made it longer than it needed to be. It would have been a much better 45-minute film than a feature length. But it gets kind of redundant in there, I think, as I recall. I did watch it once, but mostly, read during it. But I guess if you wanted to learn about me, you could do that if you didn't have anything better to do with your time. Yes?
Two things. One is, with A Beautiful Spring Day, you said that it was sort of a compendium of 3 previous books. Is that correct?
Yes.
But which books were those? And then could you say something about Frank's 2 little companions that he's drawn with?
Well, the 3 books were Congress of the Animals, Fran, and Poochie Town. And like I said, when they just formed this kind of unfinished knot of stories. In fact, for the title page of Fran, it said Continuing and Discontinuing Congress of the Animals. And on the title page of Poochie Town, it says Discontinuing Fran and Congress of the Animals or something. I didn't have any sense of them being sequential. They just existed. And then when this recontextualizing, this idea came that made those 3 books into the core of One Beautiful Spring Day, it was like all the mistakes I had made and everything I had done and leaving these things incomplete made sense. It was almost as if I had planned it, but I really didn't. And I was really surprised when it came together the way it did. It was a mind blower for me. Yes?
How do you select the scenes that you paint? Oils or watercolors?
Oh, I just try to think of something that I'd like to see. Something I would like to see. I think that's what's behind all those non-Frank things. What would I like to see? When I first started drawing the kinds of drawings I wanted to make, the first one I did, I remember staring at it and waves of satisfaction and happiness. And it was like I had created super customized metaphysical pornography or something. It just obsessed me, and it was unhealthy. give a drawing to a friend, and then I'd go over to their house and I'd take the drawing off the wall and just sit and stare at it because it like nourished me in this weird way. And that still happens occasionally. But I just draw things that I want to see that I won't see any other way. Does that make sense?
Yes.
Yes.
No, just totally makes sense.
Oh, it does. Good.
Hey, Jim.
Hey.
I was wondering what you do when you get stuck, because you seem like you're really prolific to me, and what you would do if you no longer made art.
Well, as a matter of fact, I've just had what you might call a block where I couldn't figure out how to bring the pieces together and make them work. And I just go in the studio and beat my head against that wall until it caves in. I mean, I show up and I work as if I knew what I was doing. I draw pictures, and even if they come out terrible and I throw them all away, I put in that time. And eventually something gives. It's not pleasant to be in that state. It's the worst. It's like being constipated, impotent, and crazy. It's terrible.
And what would you do if you were not an artist?
Oh, God. Be a clam digger, maybe, or a hobo. I don't know. I really don't know. I mean, one of the reasons I threw myself into being an artist is because I didn't have any other alternatives. I didn't go to, I barely graduated from high school and didn't get along with very many people and had no idea how to get a job or, show up at work nicely dressed and act properly. I just couldn't do any of that stuff. I wish I could. I would like to have more options, but I don't. So I'm just lucky that but there's a lesson there because I just stayed with it until something happened. And I think that's kind of a principle in life. You can, like if you get in a fight, they say you grab onto something and hang on. And that's how you prevail. And I think I compare myself to a hereditary farmer. Whether I get a crop or not, I stay with it. Well, it looks like we're about done here. Oh, there's one.
Do you have any comments about the landscape of the island since you've moved here?
Comments about it?
Yeah.
You want me to promote Vashon? It's a nice place to live. Everybody should come here because it's so beautiful. You just
The madrone tree, and I wondered if the things that you've seen as you've walked around here have influenced some visions you have.
No, I don't think so. I mean, I love it here, of course. I love the Pacific Northwest, but it's just beauty. When I'm out around here, I just take it in. I don't think about it much. Just like being here.
Okay, one more in the back.
One more in the back.
Hi, Jim. Thank you for being here. I'm curious, because your comics are so visual and you've talked about how difficult it is to describe them. Do you have fans that are low or no vision and have had loved ones describe the stories or the events in them and have a relationship to these comics despite not being able to see them?
No, I don't think I ever have experienced that, but I'd like to think that it happens. I think it raises a good point because the drawings are about things, and the way they're drawn and what happens, how it's presented really doesn't matter that much, I don't think. There are ideas in these stories that are fruitful to ponder. There's stuff going on in these stories that have relevance and use outside of the context of the story that they're in, I think. I can say that. I can praise these things unreservedly because, like I said, I don't think I wrote them.
Do you have a favorite drawing in this exhibit? Out here?
Did you hear that one?
Yeah, I did hear it. A favorite drawing? Well, I like that painting of the dork from the Black Lagoon. I think that's my, that one gives me I like that one the most, I guess, yes.
Okay, I think we do have one more. Keep coming.
Your thoughts on Push Paw, Push Paw? Were they just like there from the start, part of Frank, just there?
No, they each got introduced in their own stories. Pupshaw was sort of a more menacing figure when she turned out she was kind of scary, but it turned out she was filled with miniature Pupshaws, and when she disgorged those, she felt better and became affectionate. And the Pup-Shaw we know and love today had arrived. And Pushpaw got his own story too. He showed up and was smitten with Pup-Shaw and tried to court her, but got nowhere until she found herself in a predicament, and along with Frank and Pushpaw rescued them both by chewing through the barrier between them and a better reality and letting them out. And that forged a bond between them. And Frank is utterly, he's such a non-entity. But Pushpaw and Pup-Shaw have a lot of personality and a lot of power. One of the mysteries of this setup is why these almost godlike creatures have made themselves subservient to this non-entity. But that whole landscape is like that. He lives in a house, baskets of food appear on the table. One of the things that happens in one beautiful spring day is he has to get a job. And all of a sudden you realize, wow, he really had it made before this, Now he's got this awful job, and, if he'd known, if only he'd known.
Well, thank you. I want to thank everybody for coming.
Thank you very much. Thanks for having me.
So if you just give us a couple minutes, we will meet you in the lobby for the pen demo and more signing. We just need to get Jim off back there and get it set up. Thank you.